Facebook chief executive Mark Zuckerberg has apologized after a 6-hour social media outage that affected Facebook, Instagram and WhatsApp. The outage hit South Africa at around 5:30 yesterday afternoon. Facebook and its WhatsApp and Instagram apps went dark in what's been described as the largest such failure to date. Facebook said this morning that the company believed that the root cause of the outage was a faulty configuration change and that it had no evidence that user data was compromised. The outage was the second blow to the social media giant in as many days after a whistleblower on Sunday accused the company of repeatedly prioritizing profit over clamping down on hate speech and misinformation. For more, we're joined via Zoom by social media analyst Pritesh Suraj and from Worldwide Works, Arthur Goldstuck. Gentlemen, a very good morning to both of you. Arthur, let's start with you. Did the outage expose personal information of users?
No information was exposed. It, in fact, was the opposite. It took all Facebook properties offline, and even Facebook's internal systems were taken offline. So no one could access Facebook, let alone personal information.
So, Pritish, do you believe this outage could have been caused by an internal mistake in how internet traffic is routed to its systems?
Yeah, I think, if you look at it, in the end of the day, this was someone's mistake internally, and I'm sure somebody is in quite a bit of trouble at Facebook was going to be today when they do eventually wake up. So essentially, these are kind of things that these organizations plan for, and sometimes issues do happen, but essentially it was somebody's job within the organization to ensure that Facebook should never go down, and it's cost them quite a bit of money because it did go down.
Arthur, Mark Zuckerberg talks about a configuration problem, but this is unprecedented, isn't it?
It's not quite unprecedented. The scale of it is, but this kind of thing has happened before. In fact, Facebook had an outage in 2019 that seemed to be a misconfiguration of what they call the domain name system, which is the system for addressing on the internet that routes all requests from your browser or your apps to the correct place. And you can make one small error in the number of your system on the DNS, the domain name system, and that could actually take you offline completely. Or you can delete a line and suddenly you're invisible to the world. So this happens from time to time. In fact, it happened last week to the Slack collaboration platform as well. And the previous outages for Facebook were actually very costly. And Mark Zuckerberg actually acknowledged in an internal meeting that it had been hugely expensive for the organization the previous time, and that it took them months to regain the trust of users. So we can expect that again this time. We can expect this to have been costly, not just in the share price, which actually lost tens of billions of dollars in market capitalization, but also in terms of user trust and people looking for alternatives like Telegram, for example, which got a massive boost last night.
I thought, were the previous times as far-reaching?
They weren't as far-reaching as this. They didn't take as long as this. Typically, they would get it right or reset it within the hour. But it seems that the server center where this particular system was located that went down was operating on autopilot. In other words, there wasn't anyone at the location to fix it, so they had to send people out. And in effect, they had to do what you and I have to do when our computers go wrong or crash. We have to reboot them. That's exactly what they had to do there. And they had to physically do it, which is actually very amusing in this time of everything being digital and automated.
Pritesh, what are your thoughts about this particular outage and just its global footprint?
Yeah, I think as Arthur has highlighted, the previous outage lasted about an hour and it was really quick. This actually, if you look at it in the US, it lasted around nearly 7.5 hours. So it was quite a long, sustained period of time. And so the biggest challenge that you actually have is that when something like this happens, it speaks to the core product. So Facebook obviously has a lot of work to do with the advertisers, reassuring them that any projects, any plan, you got to understand this is a global property. there are also brands that may be using this platform for global launches, for global announcements that may have been affected by this. And ultimately, just the core advertising, the revenue that they lost was around $100 million US. And as Arthur has highlighted, billions of dollars in actual share price. So there's a lot of work that's going to be ahead for Facebook to restore the trust, not just of users, but of advertisers as well, who rely on Facebook's ecosystem.
Exactly. You're talking about those companies that rely on Facebook. And Arthur, what does this do to the companies run by social media and influencers relying on social media?
Well, for them it was catastrophe, but at least they had alternative social networks to visit, like, for example, Twitter, which was the biggest beneficiary, and LinkedIn, which is an increasingly important social network in the business world and amongst professionals. So the influencers who were all about lifestyle and image probably had to quickly learn how to become business thinkers and professional networkers, as opposed to just social butterflies.
I suppose the question now to ask is the way forward, the company's ability to prevent further outages such as this one. A lot of talk this morning about revenue losses for Mark Zuckerberg. Pritesh, what's the conversation here?
Yeah, obviously there needs to be a lot of work in terms of their systems and processes and getting that right. I mean, the previous outage, most recent one, which was an hour long, should have given them the learnings that they needed to prevent this from happening again. And the fact that now it's happened subsequently, and for the scale of it to be this massive, actually shows that the risk of Facebook being able to go down for a longer period of time is something that's probably going to weigh really heavily on the board of Facebook this morning. So I'm sure they're putting more stringent systems and processes in place to ensure this doesn't happen. But again, you never know. These things, it's technical. You could potentially have another outage, and they don't want to do this because there's a huge reputational and a huge financial loss for the organization.
So we're reporting that in as many days, the owners of these three social media platforms are going through difficult times. Over the weekend, a whistleblower coming out to say that Facebook prioritizes making profits above the security of its users and making sure that it controls social content throughout different parts of the world where it operates. Arthur, can they survive this reputational damage?
They will certainly survive it, but the outage couldn't have come at a worse time, because it highlights many of the criticisms and warnings around Facebook's ownership of so many platforms: Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram. The combination of all of those means that they have massive control over people's communications, not just social but business as well. And there have been calls to break up Facebook, and in particular to roll back their takeover of WhatsApp, or to split out WhatsApp. I'll just share some very quick stats with you from our social media landscape study that we released earlier this year with a company called Ornico, where we showed that of South Africans who use the internet aged from 16 to 64, 93% use WhatsApp, 86% use Facebook, 70% use Instagram, and 64% Facebook Messenger. And that shows you the massive dependency on this one organization. So this will give ammunition to regulators who want to break it up. But it should also be a warning, as Pritesh pointed out, that Facebook have got to change the way they configure their systems and how they house these platforms. In other words, having all of their platforms dependent on one server system is clearly a strategic error and a very dangerous and expensive error. So we can expect to see changes there, but we can also expect to see the regulators come down even harder on Facebook, armed with this information and ammunition.
Just finally, Pritesh, your thoughts about the outage and the timing coinciding with those revelations by the whistleblower?
Yeah, I think I said, in terms of the whistleblower, there's quite I think there's a lot more that's going to come over the next few days or so, where we're going to find out a lot more. So that's something I don't want to comment on at this point. But what I do think we can comment on is that Facebook's very valuable to consumers around the world. And I think yesterday's outage highlighted this really so. I mean, there are a number of people who are quite shocked by this outage and who are impacted in their ability not to be able to communicate, not to be able to share the content that they wanted to share. So Facebook is adding a
Unfortunately, we got a freeze there, but Pritesh Suraj is a social media analyst, and Arthur Goldstuck from Worldwide Works. Thank you so much to both of you for contributing to this conversation, which also flows into our question of the day, where we're asking you how you managed these few hours of not being able to be on social media. I think we're taking a look at some of your thoughts right now.